Welcome to Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College, and today we're really fortunate to have Danielle Perry, associate professor in the Department of Earth and Sustainability at Northern Arizona University. Danielle is a water resources geographer, and she'll share with us not only a lot about her background, but a bit of insight concerning water resources in the American West and elsewhere. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. As I conduct many of these interviews, I ask those that are being interviewed to comment about their childhood, their experiences growing up, and maybe episodes in those growing up years that might have sparked some interest in geography, and what might have captivated you to pursue geography, and also to comment on your undergraduate and graduate studies. And if you don't mind, and maybe even if you do mind, I might even interject a few things here and there.
That sounds great. Yeah, so I'm a water baby. That was clear as a child, and I actually was thinking about this the other day, and I realized that how I got to be where I am today is kind of a math equation. When I was 4, I told my mom I was born to swim. When I was 8, I went rafting for the first time in the Appalachian Mountains. I grew up in Florida, on an island in a lake surrounded by rivers that were full of manatees. So my charismatic megafauna is a manatee. But when I went to these rapid rivers of the mountains and was able to go whitewater rafting, I was hooked. So 4 + 8 is 12. At 12, I decided I wanted to be a river guide when I grew up and that I wanted to have my own rafting company. So I did that. I actually became a guide. I moved to Costa Rica. I ran a little boutique ecotourism rafting company down there. And when I was there, I got involved in some river conservation efforts, some advocacy efforts to save this one particular river that I was working on from dams. And this river's so special because it's home to the Quebecer people, an indigenous group of people in Costa Rica. And I realized that if this river were to be dammed, it would destroy their way of life. It would displace the people. It would destroy the forest ecosystem, and really force them into a different lifestyle that they were not interested in. So I partnered with a bunch of people in Costa Rica to create this group called Amigos del Rio Pacuare, with the idea of saving this river. So one day, I was sitting on my apartment floor and I was sorting through environmental impact assessments, looking for some kind of evidence about how we could stop these dams from being built. And I realized that I needed to go back to school. I needed to understand what it was that was driving the development of hydropower all across Latin America. And so I came back to the United States, and I went to college at Humboldt State University when I was 24. So there's the math equation. And when I was at Humboldt State, which is now Cal Poly Humboldt, I wasn't majoring in geography. I was double majoring in international studies with a Latin America focus and Spanish, so that I could do better advocacy work in the region with a deeper understanding of the history of the place that I was working in and that I had come to love. And as part of that degree track, I had to take a geography class. It was a cultural geography class. And my professor was Stephen Cunha. And learning about geography, I realized all of a sudden my life made sense, and that I was a geographer and that I could actually be a professor, do research on the things I was passionate about, have the summers more or less off so that I could be on rivers and continue to pull together my passion for research and for advocacy in this career. So
make a difference for humanity and the environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks to Steve, I got inspired to continue on the track as a geographer. I ended up getting a minor in geography at Humboldt and then going on to University of Nevada, Reno for a master's degree, where I worked with Dr. Kate Berry and did my thesis on hydropower development in Latin America and looking at the political economy of that process through regional integration and understanding how global economics was really driving this hydropower development.
And this was very important at the time because at this moment, Plan Pueblo Panama was really in effect. It was making major progress across Middle America.
Absolutely, and this is ongoing. The regional integration of the Americas from North America to South America is still happening. It is driving hydropower development. It is driving all sorts of other types of infrastructure development across these areas where there are large populations of indigenous peoples, unique populations of people, marginalized groups of people who live close to the river and depend on the rivers. And so that work that I was doing in my master's degree informed my PhD work, which was actually looking at what kind of policies can we use to protect rivers from hydropower development and other types of degradation. And that work, which I can tell you a little bit more about in a minute, has coupled with that thesis work, that master's work, and now led to the kind of research agenda that I have going on in my Free Flowing Rivers Lab here at NAU. And we're working all around the world, looking at ways to protect, restore, and manage rivers so that they can be resilient in the face of climate change, so that the peoples who live close to and depend on those rivers can live with knowing that their river is going to stay free flowing, and that their ecosystem that they depend on is going to have some integrity. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your dissertation now, characterized by really 3 related but distinctive articles.
Yeah. So my dissertation was looking at the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act of 1968 in the United States and its uneven application across or distribution across the United States. So this policy is particularly interesting because it's the first ever river protection policy created in the world and in the legal systems that we're familiar with. And it is actually a system. It's a law that protects individual rivers within a larger system. And the way that I think about this river policy is that it is aimed at protecting riverine ecosystem services that are important to society, that are important at a regional level and a national level. And the idea with this policy, the research that came out of my dissertation, is reframing this policy so that it can be considered as a climate adaptation policy to be used for riverine resilience, not just in the United States, but applied in places like Costa Rica that are looking for ways to permanently protect their rivers. And now I have seen over the years that there are, subsequent research coming out of my dissertation has identified other countries around the world that have used our policy framework to create their similar systems within their own countries. And we're trying to use this framework in places like the Amazon now. What lessons can we learn from the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act? And how can we modify our policy framework to fit the particular geographies of other places in the world that really need to protect their rivers, their free-flowing rivers? And the world right now, this decade, is aimed at protecting 30% of its land, inland waters, ocean and marine territories, at least 30% by 2030. And we're in 2024, halfway through. So that leaves 5.5 years, if I'm doing the math right, to achieve that goal. And the nice thing is the whole world is focused on achieving that goal. So we can use these existing policies to create new policies in places that don't have protections yet, but need to achieve that 30 by 30 agenda. And that's what we're doing here in the lab today, is trying to help other places think through what types of policies would work best in their particular ecosystems and political climates.
We'll revisit your work in the lab in a few moments, but first I'd like to digress just a moment and comment on your research, because you have engaged in some historical narrative. You've developed historical narratives within the framework of your research, and those provide the reader then with, I think, a good deal of understanding in terms of how we got to where we are today. Would you offer some insight concerning how important you believe it is to offer a glimpse of historical geography, really, in providing this evidence for assessing and hopefully resolving a problem that exists in the natural environment?
Absolutely. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was an unstudied policy, but it's the first one of its kind. And so I really wanted to understand how it was created and why it was created. What were the drivers behind creating this policy, and whose voices were being heard in the creation of the policy? So I did what we call archaeology of knowledge, right? Foucault's archaeology of knowledge. I went to the LBJ Presidential Library Archives in Austin, Texas. And I spent almost a month there in those archives every day from open to close, digging through boxes of materials that came out of the White House during the Lyndon B. Johnson administration. Some of these boxes had never been opened. And I was looking at all of the different things that were happening in the United States and globally, actually, that were influencing the creation of not just this policy, but many of the other policies that came out during the 1960s and early 1970s, what we call the environmental era of the United States. And what I found was that this was a period of time in the 60s when this policy was being negotiated, actually the 50s and 60s. It took 10 years to get it approved. It was a time of mass urbanization in the United States and elsewhere in the world post-World War II. People were moving in droves to cities. They were leaving rural areas. They were no longer working in extractive industries. They were working in the busy hubbub of a city. The cities were polluted. They were noisy. They were crowded. And people started looking back at those rural areas where they used to extract resources and started thinking about them as places to go recreate instead. Recreate, as in recreate yourself. Go there, relax, get a sense of well-being from being in nature. Be next to a nice, clean river, not a polluted one that flows by a factory, but one that's out in the wild, right, away from the city center, and just to decompress. And so the huge recreation industry boomed during this period of time. And the government, what was called at the time the Bureau of Recreation, was actually looking at this as a way to not just create a whole new category of economic development in the country, but also as a way to address the mental health crisis that was happening in the United States at that time because of what was happening in the cities. And so there was a lot of support for conservation at the same time, our rivers were polluted. We had rivers on fire, right? The Cuyahoga River is famous, but we also had rivers that were so polluted that kids couldn't swim in them. You couldn't eat the fish that you caught. This was the massive period of dam development in the country between the 30s and the 60s, where dams were being built all over the place, flooding out lands, flooding out communities, displacing those communities. And so what I found in the archives were letter after letter after letter being written to the president, the Secretary of Interior, to the First Lady saying, please protect our free-flowing rivers. Please clean our polluted water. Please do something to protect these places that are so important to us as individuals, to our families. And so this was really driving, this was really driving this need to balance development with protection, right? Development with conservation of our resources. And so, so the other thing that was happening was this was during the Cold War. And what I found was that on a geopolitical front, that the United States was actually taking pride in the fact that they were doing work to clean up the country. This was the period of the beautification movement, where we were cleaning up our roads, putting out fines if you were littering in the roads, cleaning up dump sites, all of that kind of stuff that was happening along the highways. And this was not just to clean up our country, but there was this support for it in Congress, because there was this sense of pride that the United States was leading the world in cleaning up and protecting its resources. And that made us better on the global stage than our enemies in the Cold War, to put it frankly. And so all of these things
and
together,
environmental degradation in the former Soviet Union was horrendous. There was an environmental policy minister that wrote the Samizdat, an underground manuscript called "The Destruction of Nature in the Soviet Union," where he commented about this, and this was these travesties, in the Soviet bloc were not unknown in the U.S.
Exactly. Yes. And this was also the time when we were really seeing the disappearance of species around the world.
Mm-hmm.
The IUCN had meetings during this period of time where they were working towards protecting and restoring habitat for species that were really starting to disappear in mass. And so, in the 60s, we got what is today the version of the Endangered Species Act. We got the Clean Water Act. We got the Clean Air Act. And it ended with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We also got the Wilderness Act in the 1960s, 1964. And in 1968, we got the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And it's such an understudied policy, and no one really understands it, because if you think about it, when you look at a map, you can see the polygon of a national park. Everyone talks about national parks, right? You get your national park passport. It's easy to see that block on a map. But rivers are these linear features that take up a tiny little space on a map. Many times they're not even labeled as wild and scenic on a map. And when people are driving on their road trip to relax, go explore, they drive over a river so fast. You drive over that bridge and you might see a little sign that says Wild and Scenic River, but you go through it in a blip. And so people don't really understand this policy. They don't understand what it sets out to do and how it can actually be used. And I think it's an amazing policy. It's really strong. It stood up in court. It has teeth. And it's a really great way to ensure the permanent protection of free-flowing rivers, water quality, and those ecosystem services like biodiversity, habitat, freshwater provisioning, recreation, cultural, spiritual services, education opportunities, all sorts of ecosystem services, nutrient cycling, flood recession agriculture. And those are trickling down into these major benefits that we enjoy for free, essentially for free, just by protecting that river. And that's like natural infrastructure to fight against floods and droughts, national security, food security, mental health, public health. These are big things that we get just by saying, hey, we're going to set these rivers aside and we're going to keep them in the way that they are because they're so important to society and to nature in and of itself. So I could go on about it. I think it's
You're
pretty
a gifted
obvious.
storyteller, and it's interestingly the catalyst for my interrogative was having read your work. I was thinking, my goodness, you really have a gift for writing a narrative that captures individuals' interests, and you're also gifted in terms of your oral communication. I'm sure your students are captivated, and you can go on. But I guess one thing I'd like to ask is if you could comment on the impact of global climate change and the manner in which this kind of legal framework addresses it.
Yes. So climate change is real, and everywhere around the world, we're feeling the effects of it. Some rivers are drying up, some rivers are flooding more, and it's directly affecting the communities adjacent to those rivers. And the consequences of the changes in precipitation and temperature have ripple effects that not are just there at the riverside communities, but ripple out across society and around the globe. And right now, I'm really focused. So my work, as I mentioned, looked at this policy in the US, but then how can it be applied elsewhere in the world? And right now, I have a focus on the Amazon basin, which is a huge basin. It crosses 8 countries, and it's the Amazon and the Congo are the 2 largest basins with the most free-flowing rivers left in the world. The Amazon is the number 1. It provides something like 17% of the fresh water to the oceans. And that's important for maintaining the balance of salinity and everything else in the oceans. It is a regulator of climate at the local level as well as the global level. We know this. We hear about protecting the Amazon forest all the time.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe its discharge is greater than the other 9 rivers that make up the top 10.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. It's a huge river. And so this river, when we talk about protecting the forest, people don't focus on the fact that you cannot protect the forest without protecting the river because they are inextricably linked. Those forests depend on the river. The forests produce the rain that feeds the river. The forests produce the precipitation that goes over into the Andes that provides snow to keep those glaciers there that melt slowly and allow for the water to trickle down into the Andean communities. The Amazon basin is so critically important to the entire world. And we're focusing on forests and not on rivers. And so right now, there's a huge movement of people in the Amazon and researchers around the world trying to figure out ways to protect the free-flowing rivers so that it in turn helps to protect the forests and the indigenous communities that are there, the fishery communities that are there that depend on these free-flowing rivers for the fish that live there, the unique fish in the Amazon basin. So I forgot your question, but the idea of this work here in the U.S. has the potential to expand around the world and provide these frameworks for other places to address climate change through river protection, river restoration as well. Because when we restore a river, say taking a dam out like they're doing in the Klamath rivers right now, the largest dam removal project in the history of the world, 4 dams coming out, restoring miles and miles of free-flowing river, you want to protect that. You don't want it to be opened up again for more dam development. So restore rivers, protect them, keep them free-flowing is the idea. When we're talking about climate change, we have to protect the free-flowing river system, because little chunks of protected river don't do the job of allowing for the movement of species up and down a river corridor. And it's not just the channel and the water in the channel. We're talking riverine ecosystem, which is also the riparian area, that area from the transition between the water and the uplands. And those riparian areas, known as ribbons of life, are habitat to so many different species that depend on rivers, and at least for some part of their life cycle. So birds that migrate, for instance, use rivers as their migratory corridors. They use them as breeding grounds. We need to protect those corridors so that we're protecting species that might be threatened, endangered, or to keep them from becoming threatened, endangered. And in the case of climate change, when we have more and more changes, right, in that precipitation, in the temperatures, protecting and managing those river corridors to keep them resilient is incredibly important. Protecting headwaters is really important in the face of climate change, because those headwaters provide refugia for species who need cold water. So I just came back from the Klamath last week. I was there seeing the dams come out and participated in some restoration activity. So here's a little example. I was working with the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council for one day with the people I was with to install beaver dam analogs. So these are like look-alike dams that create the same effect as a beaver dam in these channels that are off stream. So little tributaries where there's cold water coming in. Those tributaries are incredibly important for the migratory salmon as they're living out their life cycle, the babies in particular. When the water drops low in the summer and it gets hot, they can't survive in the main channel of the river. So they need these little tributaries that are providing that cold water coming in from the mountains to hang out until the rains come in the fall and the main channel comes back up and they can go back out there. So these little tributaries with these little dams provide pools, deep pools, and those baby salmon can go in there and hang out and survive, right? So as I said, it's not just the main channel, it's the whole riparian area and those tributaries coming in that need to be protected and managed in a way to allow for these species to survive in a changing climate. Restoring degraded riverine, like riparian areas, restoring native species so that plant species, so that the animal species can thrive there and have shade, and that those species shade the river. And without focused protections and without focused management, we run the risk of losing these benefits, these ecosystem services that these intact riverine ecosystems provide. The issue that we're facing now is that there's this global discourse around climate change and the need for renewable energy, and that is driving more dam development. So dams historically have been seen as clean, green, renewable energy, but they're really not. They actually lead to the production of a lot of greenhouse gases, methane from the reservoirs, carbon dioxide from the cement, curing of the cement, the mixing and curing of the cement that they use to build the dams. So they are not great alternatives to fossil fuel energy, what we really need is solar, wind, etc. But the dam industry is saying, look, we can build hydropower, it's renewable, it's green, and it's really threatening a lot of those free-flowing rivers in those basins like the Amazon, like the Congo. And we're even seeing a resurgence of the pressures to build more dams in the United States. And so it's a new phase of infrastructure development on our rivers that we have to counter with really solid arguments of why we need to be not building more dams, but taking dams out so that our rivers can be resilient in the face of climate change. Otherwise, we really run the risk of losing species like salmon, which are so critical for the whole ecosystem and for indigenous groups of people. That's
We're so
just one
fortunate.
example.
We're so fortunate that there are grassroots organizations, environmental organizations, and academics like you that are working both apart and in concert to address these very important issues, because we tend to shoot ourselves in the foot seeking short-term gains as humanity often does, you know. Now,
Yes.
let's talk briefly about some of your students that you work with in the lab. Can you talk about some of their projects?
Absolutely. So I've been at NAU. I just finished my 7th year here. And over that period, I have established the Free Flowing Rivers Lab. And the students who come to work in this lab are all interested in water in some way, mostly rivers, but we also work with springs because those are often the headwaters of rivers. And in this area where I am in northern Arizona, we actually don't have a lot of perennial rivers, but we have a lot of springs that provide water to the tribes in this region. And so we work in the local area around issues of tribal water issues, and then across the country and around the globe. So a few studies that have come out of the lab that are particularly interesting, and you can find them as publications, is one is looking at prioritizing dam sites for removal in the western United States in watersheds that already have a wild and scenic designation or a river that's eligible for wild and scenic designation, to think through what the potential benefits of removing a dam and extending the extent of free-flowing rivers in that watershed and what benefits can come from that. And the student who worked on that is Katie Goots, and she actually was just hired by American Rivers to be the lead for dam removal and river restoration. And so that work that she did was fundamental to her career trajectory. And I'm super proud of her. She's an amazing student, and I know she's going to do great things for our rivers. Another student, Rachel Ellis, worked on looking at ways in which we can use existing policies in the United States, not wild and scenic, other types of policies, but using them in anti-colonial ways to help the tribes here, the Hopi and Navajo in particular, but all of the Grand Canyon tribes, to find a way to find permanent protection for their most sacred site. And this is specifically speaking to the Hopi. Their site is called Sipapuni, and it's a spring that has created this travertine dome. And in their religion, in their cosmology, that is their place of emergence into the world. And so cultural renewal for the Hopi revolves around that spring and that dome persisting. And if it disappears, that would be something like Jerusalem disappearing. And what would the impact of that be on the 3 religions that revolve around Jerusalem? And so we did a study that Rachel led, looking at various policies and how they might be used to protect this sacred site. There's another study that we did in the lab that was looking at what, not just wild and scenic, but what other types of policies exist at, say, the national level all around the world to protect rivers. And we uncovered things like wild and scenic like policies, maybe national parks, protected areas, certain ones do protect rivers, decrees from presidents or prime ministers to protect a river. And this other policy that's emerging since 2017 and kind of spreading rapidly around the world, more rapidly than other policies actually, called Rights of Rivers. And that's based on the rights of nature idea, that nature has the same rights as a human, and that people can actually go to court to argue for the rights of some aspect of nature, and in this case, rivers. And this policy, we're seeing it applied in places that actually have large indigenous communities. That policy or that paper came out of the lab, and it included one of my close colleagues, Ian Harrison, and then several students, a graduate student, Stephanie Fernandez, and 2 undergraduate students. And so I really like to include the undergrads in the research process, those undergrads who are thinking that they might want to go on to graduate school, and to get them involved in this process. And so a lot of the publications that come out of the lab actually include undergraduate research assistants, and either master's or PhD students.
This is fascinating, really, because you're creating an entourage of specialists in water resources that are again, undergraduates, graduate students, and reaching out to colleagues. It appears that you have become quite the mentor to many. And I guess I'll ask you, can you draw from your own experiences and offer some examples of the mentors that you've had that might have given you insight concerning how you engage in mentoring today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have been so lucky to have really amazing mentors. As I mentioned, when I was in my undergrad, I was inspired by Steve Cunha's work. He does international conservation work as well. And so once I decided I was a geographer and that I was going to pursue that degree path, he mentored me through the rest of my undergraduate career. He helped me prepare for applying for graduate school. He connected me with potential advisors and advised me to go attend the Association of Pacific Coast Geographers annual meeting that happened to be held in Eugene, Oregon that year, which was not much of a drive from where I was in Arcata. And I went up to Eugene and I met all of these faculty members from across the Pacific Coast region. And that's where I met Kate Berry. And it was instantly obvious that we would make a great team. And so I applied to UNR. And it's the only place I applied to, which I don't recommend, actually. I highly recommend applying to multiple places. But I only applied to UNR, and I was lucky. I got in. I got to work with Kate. And Kate was just a fantastic mentor. You know, she was very even keel. She was always available. She really let me drive the ship in my research. And I came with the project. I came with the work that I had been doing in Costa Rica. And so, you know, she filled in the blanks for me, helped me figure out how to write a research question, you know, how to do the whole process. And she was just so kind and supportive. And having that strong female mentorship was really important as a young woman entering into the academy. And I learned a lot from her about teaching and about some of the extracurriculars that we do. She does a Student World Water Forum at UNR. I adopted that and created one here at NAU. We call it the Student Water Symposium. It's an annual symposium that's open to the whole campus. And anyone doing anything related to water can present in that symposium. And it's become a tradition here at the school. And I learned that from Kate. And it's a way to connect the campus and community, which is really important. You know, sometimes there isn't that connection. And so allowing people from the community to come in and see the research that our students are doing, our undergrads and our grad students, actually is a great way to funnel students into jobs when they finish, because we get a lot of potential employers that come to this symposium, not just interested community members.
Well, and it enhances the relationship between the institution and the local community.
Absolutely.
Which
Absolutely.
is important, especially in an era when there are anti-education initiatives erupting all over.
You're spot on. Absolutely. You know, sometimes communities, especially smaller communities like Flagstaff, which is growing, the university is growing, and sometimes there's a tension, right, between what's the community and what's the campus. And if we can connect those and help the community understand that what we're doing on campus is actually really relevant to the sustainability of our communities, they tend to feel like, you know, they're benefiting from what we're doing here. And it's not just this expanding campus environment that might be encroaching on local housing, for instance, which is an issue here in this town, as well as other towns across the country. So then after working with Kate, I went to University of Oregon and worked with Alec Murphy and had really close collaborations with Katie Meehan, Pat McDowell, and Peter Walker, as well as other faculty across the country or across the campus. And again, I came with a project in mind, and they, you know, each of them really helped me think through the different aspects of the theoretical foundation of the dissertation and the different stages that I had to work in. And, you know, sometimes a mentor isn't someone who works with you for the 3 to 5 years you're in a PhD program. Sometimes it's someone who's just been watching your trajectory, who might mention one little thing to you that can change how you see something, how you view something. And that's really important. And it's really important, I think, and I can, you know, this is how I mentor my students, is encouraging them to not just have a relationship with me, but to build relationships with the other faculty members in the department, everyone that they take a class with, to develop a rapport with them, because they all have so much to share and we want to share, and to not be afraid to talk to the faculty.
Indeed. And in relation to that advice, as you think about providing advice to students, I'm going to say we have about a minute or two to go here, and I'm going to ask you to consider really the path that you've trod in academe and in life, I suppose, knowing undergraduate students, knowing graduate students. Do you have any advice that you can give for students that might aspire to pursue geography or a career in water resources, graduate students completing their theses and dissertations? Do you care to share a few bits and pieces of what you've learned and what you'd like students to know?
Well, the number one piece of advice I give to all students in all my classes is do what you love. Because if you do what you love, you're going to shine. And people are going to know that you're passionate about this thing, that you love it, and that you're going to go the distance and even more to do the job right. And there are lots of jobs out there, and especially in water resources, in restoration, in protection, in management. So there's never a shortage of jobs. And if you're the person who's doing what you love, you're going to rise to the top and you're going to be able to get those jobs. You're going to love what you do. So you're going to be able to get out of bed every day and go do that, even when it might be the boring part of this, you know, the process. So that's my number one piece of advice. The second piece of advice I have, which was given to me by a mentor in my PhD program, Shaul Cohen, was to read this book called The Professor is In. And this isn't product placement, but it was really, really helpful for me when I was getting ready to go on the job market. And I read it my last year of my PhD program. And I really wish that I had read it during my master's program because it would have prepared me better for going into the PhD. And then through that process, it's particularly helpful for women, people of color, underrepresented groups of people. It offers some pretty snarky, just spot on
I know
advice.
the author. I know of the author, I should say. Yes, and she's done a very good job in writing these things.
Yeah, so
Then
I think
it's valuable. Those pieces of advice are very valuable.
Yeah. So I actually have any master's student I have in the lab who says they want to go to a PhD, I have them read it.
There
Any
you go.
incoming PhD student, I have them read it. If they still want to get a PhD after they're done reading it, then thumbs up, go
There
for
you
it.
go.
Yes.
Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really glad you're able to spend this time with us. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I
All
really
right.
appreciate the time.
And this now concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.